Live from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu and Kailey Leinz.
President Trump says Iran just violated the ceasefire. Welcome to the Friday edition of Balance of Power, just a day after Iran opened fire on a cargo ship in the Strait. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kailey Leinz here in Washington. Kailey, the markets haven't even blinked here, but there are real questions about the status of peace talks.
Yeah, of course, we don't know when the next round of talks between the U.S. and Iran, formal ones, that is, will take place. And we have seen violations of a ceasefire been accused before. Iran repeatedly accused the United States of it while it was still maintaining its naval blockade. Of course, that blockade is no longer in effect. The president had declared the Strait of Hormuz free and open, and yet the president is now saying that there were 4 one-way attack drones at least that were launched at ships transversing the Strait of Hormuz. He says, and this is a direct quote, obviously this is a foolish violation of our ceasefire agreement.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean he's going to do anything about that, but he's dropping a marker on this. And boy, isn't it amazing, the lack of reaction on Wall Street? We've really learned to live with this, apparently. Oil is, in fact, sharply lower. We've got $69 a barrel WTI, which is a price we haven't seen, since the day this whole thing started.
Yep, going back to February. It's incredible. We're down more than 4% on Brent as well at $72 a barrel. It also seems that the market isn't blinking at the other threat from the president regarding tariffs on countries that are going to impose digital services taxes. I thought some of them already do this, but he says European countries are on the verge of doing so. And if they do, 100% tariff. My question, Joe, is under what authority, given that so many of them have been ruled by the courts as being unconstitutional?
You can threaten a lot. It's different to actually implement them, as the White House has found. We'll get the latest on all this from Tyler. She came over to see us here in the studio from the White House, and we're going to talk a little bit later on this hour, Kailey, with Congresswoman Madeleine, the Democrat from Pennsylvania. No fan of President Trump's policies, but a lot to talk about here. The floor is frozen, so lawmakers are all going home. Yeah,
we're not going to see any of them until after the July 4th recess.
Right, yeah.
So it's getting a little sleepy in Washington on this Friday.
Okay.
But we still have things to cover, and there's still things moving financial markets, so let's get a check on those now as we turn to Amy Morris here in Washington. Hey, Amy.
Hey, Kailey. You know, Wall Street's a little bit sleepy, too. It's been chaotic. Some mild gains now in stocks amid the intense volatility in high-profile technology names. Let's check those markets for you. We do it all day here at Bloomberg. S&P 500 up 0.2%. NASDAQ up 0.3%. And the Dow up 0.2%. The 10-year Treasury yield at 4.36%. 2-year yield at 4.08%. Now, oil still headed for its biggest weekly drop in a month after transits through the Strait of Hormuz accelerated. But President Trump posted on social media that Iran violated the ceasefire with a drone attack in the Strait. And Oman has told European officials there's no way to go back to the pre-war status quo and that ships will likely have to start paying fees to move through the Strait. Well, oil still moving lower. WTI crude oil now 3.8% lower at $69 a barrel. Brent crude at $72 a barrel. That's about 4.4% lower. Volkswagen is looking to cut additional jobs, may even shutter factories to make Europe's biggest automaker more competitive. The plans include doubling staff reductions and cutting general overhead costs by 11 billion euro by the end of the decade. Labor leaders have vowed to oppose the plans. Volkswagen shares nearly 4% lower. Boeing secured an order from China Southern Airlines valued at $3.62 billion, marking an important win for Boeing, which shares are less than 1% higher. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Let's go back to Balance of Power now with Joe Mathieu and Kailey Leinz.
All right, Amy Morris, thank you so much. So it does seem to be a sleepy Friday overall, though you are seeing some material action in the oil market, as Joe and I and Amy were mentioning, with prices lower, despite the fact that the president is accusing Iran of violating the ceasefire in the Strait of Hormuz. As he says, the U.S. shot down 3 one-way attack drones, but of course a 4th hit a ship that was still able to continue on, but nonetheless reignited some concern yesterday over the ability for ships to transit the Strait of Hormuz after it, of course, had been declared open via this memorandum of understanding. And we still have major outstanding questions as well, Joe, about whether or not fees or tolls are going to be imposed by Iran and Oman. The different sides are saying different things about that in particular.
That's for sure. Fees, the word that Iran likes to use here, service fees, I think is what we're calling
for
it.
administration.
Yeah, it's like when you check into the hotel, who made that reference? You get the spa charge, whether you use it or not. But there are 3 routes that are emerging here in the Strait. And the U.S. is trying to keep its own under control here, but this is an indefinite presence of our military, it seems, in that part of the world.
Yeah, and for how long is that going to be deemed sustainable when, of course, the Pentagon is already requesting tens of billions of dollars more in funding from Congress for what has already taken place in the Middle East as we question the future.
Heard about this from President Trump. He was speaking at the Rose Garden Club just last evening about the status of talks. This is before the Truth Post earlier today. Listen.
They want to make a deal with us very badly, and we probably will. I think we will, but the Strait is open. Yesterday, they took out 19 million barrels of oil. That's the most in the history of the Strait. And the oil prices are dropping like a rock. And, you know, as goes oil, so goes everything else.
That's the idea. And oil is lower, $69 for WTI. And that's despite the news here with the president saying, quote, this is a foolish violation of our ceasefire agreement. Bloomberg Washington correspondent Tyler Kendall joins us right now in studio here in Washington with the latest. Tyler, is this a one-off post, or could there be a change here in the Strait?
We're going to have to see how it evolves, because this does mark the first such attack that we've seen since the Memorandum of Understanding was signed. President Trump giving us a little bit more details here beyond what we had been tracking last night when this news broke. He says that the U.S. was able to intercept 3 out of 4 of these drones, but that one ultimately hit this vessel, though damage was sustained. It was still able to continue transiting through. But you hit on a really key point, Joe, that I've been following closely here, which is that this attack happened in one of those routes that's considered to be the safer route. It's that corridor that hugs the Oman coast, where the U.S. really has some leverage and control over. So in some regard, this has perhaps undermined some of the confidence. Bloomberg News was able to review a message that one major oil company did send its vessels to say, hold put for now. We saw the UN's global shipper say that they're going to, for now, suspend evacuation operations in the wake of this. But still, the data analyzed is showing us that it's not really having that big of an impact. Ships are still making their way ultimately through the Strait.
Okay.
Well, and of course, there's the question on whether, in order to guarantee safe transit through the Strait, ships eventually are going to have to pay. Bloomberg is reporting that Oman is telling European officials that there's no way of going back to the pre-war status quo in the Strait of Hormuz, and that transiting ships may have to be charged some fees. You questioned the president about this directly at the G7, and he made it pretty clear he did not want fees associated. The Secretary of State has said the same thing. So where's the disconnect here?
I was going to bring that up. Just last night, we had Marco Rubio reiterating to reporters that that's not going to be ultimately an option. But it's very clear that it's top of mind for Iran. Earlier this week, it really came to the forefront because we saw Iran release this joint statement with Oman, saying that they were working out some sort of fee structure, navigational fees, environmental fees, along those lines. I think the Secretary of State said ultimately it would be semantics in his words, but any such charging of passage wouldn't be acceptable. But pair that with the Wall Street Journal report that I know we spoke yesterday about on this program, that Iran's estimating it could bring in $40 billion worth of revenue each year. But not only that, they're potentially going to pitch this to other countries in the Middle East, maybe even China, to share in on the costs, but also the profit of operating such a system. It leaves a lot of big open questions. Maybe that's the most contentious point right now. But then also, as you both know, we're tracking very closely President Trump last night doubling down that unfrozen Iranian assets are going to go towards U.S. farmers. That's the latest that we've also heard from Iran, disputing that that's something on the table. Fascinating.
Before we bring in the Congresswoman, Tyler, what's going on with this latest tariff threat? European countries discussing, he says, the imminent implementation of a digital services tax on American companies. To Kailey's point, some already have this. Let this statement serve to represent any country imposing such a tax will immediately be met with a 100% tariff on everything. On what grounds would that be made?
If I could take an educated guess here, I would assume that the president is teeing up something under Section 301. Okay. We know the administration actually already has investigations from the first Trump term under Section 301, which is investigation into alleged unfair trade practices. And we've seen them before pull on investigations from the first Trump term and essentially repurpose them here. Typically, these investigations take 9 months, but they're able to essentially expedite that process if the work has already been done. Section 301 is a very malleable tariff, I think it's fair to say. It can go up to 100%. There's no cap. And it also can be done indefinitely. You have to review it every 4 years. But would make sense. Maybe he's leaning towards that. Whether or not this is a negotiating tactic, I mean, you mentioned I was at the G7 last week. He said 100% tariffs on French wine if France doesn't drop it. Quickly, I will add, once we have seen a country drop it, that was Canada last year during the negotiations. They chose not to collect revenue, so
wow, fascinating.
Maybe it'll work.
All right, well, I guess we'll see. We've seen 100% tariffs threatened before, and they never actually became reality. So to some extent, we have to keep history in mind here. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall, our Washington correspondent. Thank you very much. And for another perspective now, we turn to Democratic Congresswoman Madeleine, who represents Pennsylvania's 4th District and serves on the House Foreign Affairs and Appropriations Committees. Congresswoman, welcome back to Balance of Power. I would love to begin with you on what we were just discussing with Tyler regarding the president accusing Iran of violating the ceasefire in a way that he says was foolish. If this was a ceasefire violation, should the United States do something about it?
Well, what I wish we had were diplomats actually negotiating the ceasefire. I'm sure by now everybody has read the 14-point MOU and how weak it is, how clearly drafted by Iran and for Iran that it is. And it was only a memo to talk more, to negotiate more. And we do not have solid diplomats on the ground doing the work, the difficult, complex work of negotiating the ceasefire. What we also see, and it was part of your last conversation, is just the chaos of this president, the whiplash that you can get from listening to him from 1 hour to the next, whether it is on signing bills that have been passed in a bipartisan way, like the housing bill, or about the ceasefire in Iran. Think about it. This war that was named Epic Fury has actually been an epic failure. And I say that with no pleasure. Obviously, our men and women of the military have been exquisite, but we have lost 13 members of the military. Hundreds have been wounded. More than $150 billion at least has been expended. Our munitions are low. The president's now asking for a supplemental, even as he asks for more than $1 trillion in a defense budget. The president's chaotic moves, whether it's domestic or it is international and a question of war and peace, frankly, have been very hard to follow and very hard to support. That's a serious problem for this country.
You're on the Foreign Affairs Committee, as has been mentioned, Congresswoman, and I'm just wondering what you guys talk about. And is it Democrats in one circle and Republicans in another? The stories that we keep hearing are that you're not being briefed by the administration, that you didn't even see this MOU until it was already signed. Or has it brought Democrats and Republicans together somehow because you're all living in the dark?
I didn't see it until it was leaked and picked up by the press. We have not had a briefing from the administration. We haven't had a briefing on the war, on the so-called Epic Fury, let alone on what would be a ceasefire and hopefully peace in the Middle East and a restoration of some economic ability to recover the economy by this administration. After all, what is going on in my district, what my constituents care about, are the issues of war and peace. They also care about the issues of costs. Everything the president has done has driven up costs. Originally with his reckless tariffs, and here you hear him threatening them again, 100% on you, 100% on you. But then his chaotic and inhumane immigration policy. I'd love to talk to you about my visits to both Dilley and the economic impact. Dilley, Texas, and to Moshannon in Pennsylvania, these for-profit detention camps, some holding children for months, terrorizing whole families. We have not been briefed. The president and his team have not briefed us. Secretary Hegseth has not come forward to either the appropriations or the foreign affairs committees. This is an administration, sadly, out of its depth, following an emperor who has no clothes and has shown it over and over again. And it is very dangerous for our national security and extremely harmful to our economy.
Well, you mentioned Secretary Hegseth not coming before the Appropriations Committee, we have seen a supplemental budget request handed down that includes almost $70 billion for the Pentagon and much money for other things, including Ebola response and aid to farmers, for example. What would the consequence be for our national security if the Pentagon doesn't get the funding it says it needs?
Well, I'm looking at this list from the supplemental from the White House ask. $67 billion for the war, $1.4 billion for Ebola, $11 billion for farmers, $1 billion for Penn Station, and $770 million for Department of Energy security issues. What would it mean? How about they release the $100 billion? I'm in touch with the defense industry. $100 billion from last year's big, beautiful bill. How about this administration doing its job appropriately in a straightforward fashion, even with bills that I didn't approve of, but he got them signed into law? Why are they asking for a supplemental when they have not released $100 billion worth of defense spending from his big, beautiful bill? And it's very jarring because, as you know, this week we just marked up our final appropriations bill, the 12th of 12 in the House, and it is the defense bill. For the first time in history, they have asked for more than $1 trillion in defense spending. So why in God's name would we ever need another supplemental for this failed war?
There are questions as an appropriator, Congresswoman, about what's going to happen in September. There are questions about this defense bill if the Save America Act is attached to it. But what do you think about the narrative right now that Chuck Schumer, that possibly Hakeem Jeffries, maybe yourself, will not be able to vote for a budget in time to fulfill our requirements in the next fiscal year, and we could have a shutdown ahead of the midterms?
I hope we never have another shutdown. There is absolutely no reason for it. We have, as appropriators, have been doing our job. The Senate needs to get doing theirs. Then the four corners need to come together. But the administration has to actually govern. And remember, we have a shutdown again. Shutdown is the wrong term. The week collapsed underneath the chaotic behavior of the president failing to sign the housing bill and trying to attach this falsely named Save America bill, a voter suppression bill. And what happened with the Speaker of the House? He said, sent us all home early because he could not govern. He could not get a rule passed so that legislation could move forward. We should never have another shutdown. But if we do, take a look at who's in power. In the presidency, Republicans. In the House, Republicans. In the Senate, Republicans. And now we saw yesterday with some of the releases of the Supreme Court decision, Republican-appointed justices. They're in full control. They should be able to make sure we have a budget and no one suffers a shutdown.
It's good to have you back, Congresswoman. Come see us when you get back to Washington. From Pennsylvania's 4th District, Democratic Congresswoman Madeleine Dean. Kailey, we should note, the president actually turned some fire on Republicans over this whole situation involving the House on Truth Social. He said House Republicans should unify, stop voting down rules or threatening to do so, knowing that there is a stoppage of all business on the floor right now, thanks to one Republican member.
Yeah, Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna wants to see the Senate act on the Save America Act, so she's stopping action on the floor of the House. Not sure that's going to compel the Senate to do anything, but it certainly makes the job of the Speaker much harder, which is why he had to dispatch himself to the White House yesterday to talk to Trump about it, try to get Trump to do a little public leaning on this particular member, perhaps.
Well, we're still here, and
we'll
have a lot more with our panel. They're here too. Rick and Jeanne next, only on Bloomberg.
121 on Wall Street. I'm Amy Morris. Tech stocks drag global indexes lower following renewed selling in chip makers, while a report that OpenAI could postpone its plans to go public also weighed on sentiment. We check markets for you all day long at Bloomberg. The S&P 500 up 0.2%, NASDAQ up 0.1%, the Dow up 0.1%, the 10-year Treasury yield at 4.37%, and the 2-year yield at 4.08%. SpaceX's blockbuster bond sale is weakening in the secondary market market. Traders saying they cannot recall another recent deal that's widened this sharply. Shares of SpaceX are still higher, though, about 3% higher. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now back to Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu and Kailey Leinz.
All right, Amy Morris, thank you so much. I'm Kailey Leinz alongside Joe Mathieu, tracking, as always, what's happening here in Washington. No so frequently in this second Trump term. That includes the latest on tariffs. We got a new post from President Trump on Truth Social today threatening 100% tariffs against European countries who he says are close to actually charging digital services taxes. Of course, some of them already do this, but he says 100% tariff on any and all goods sent to the United States of America will be imposed if others follow through with that. There is a question as to what authority he would use and whether or not he actually means to make good on this threat. Because, of course, Joe, we have seen frequently in this administration a tariff level threat only to be retracted, perhaps reduced. Look no further than our northern and southern neighbors as we think about what was once a threatened 50% tariff on all Canadian and Mexican goods down to 25 with a carve out, of course, for goods compliant with the USMCA agreement. This is constantly changing, although those agreements may be subject to change pretty soon as well.
Well, that's right. It's time for renewal. And of course, if they don't do anything, it automatically renews, as we understand. But there is a big question right now about what the president wants to do. He's been dumping on the USMCA recently, even though he's the man who negotiated it. Yep. And his line most recently has been, it was the way to get out of NAFTA. And he says, at this point, we don't need this. That has caused a lot of stakeholders to worry about the direction that we might be traveling in. And it's where we start our conversation with our friend and colleague, David Weston, the host of Bloomberg Wall Street Week. They're going to be digging into this on the program this evening. David, how much time is left to renegotiate this before it rolls into the next phase?
How does next week strike you? Joe, it's July 1. July 1 is the date that they put in. And I talked to some of the people who negotiated the USMCA, and they said at the time they had a 6-year period because they were pretty sure Donald Trump would not be the president then. Well, look how that turned out. It turns out he is president. But nobody involved thinks it's going to get renegotiated by July 1. They've started some preliminary talks. They have some talks scheduled into late July and August. They'll be lucky to get this done in the next several months. But it is looming, and it is making a lot of people very nervous in the auto industry and energy and, of course, in agriculture.
Well, and in agriculture, we already have seen, of course, billions of dollars in aid flowing to farmers. The administration is now requesting some $10 billion more. What is the USMCA agreement on American farmers specifically, or influence on American farmers and their incomes, David?
Well, it's a great question, Kailey. The starting point is go back and see what happened under USMCA. And what happened under USMCA is that Mexico and Canada replaced China as the largest sources for exports for the U.S. agriculture, which is critical to farmers. We went out and talked again to some farmers we did about a year ago. It's gotten a lot worse in the last year because they depend so much on exports, because they actually produce more than the United States could ever consume. One of the people we talked to was Tom Halverson, who's the CEO of CoBank. I know you know him. He's a major supplier of credit to farmers across the country. And this is part of what he said farmers are looking at with respect to the USMCA.
Right now, about 20% of our agricultural product in total has to be exported. We have no population growth in the United States right now. So the more agricultural productivity and output we have, it's not hard to recognize that it's got to go someplace, right? And we're not going to consume it here in the United States. So the long-term future for U.S. agriculture, it can be defined as exports, exports, and more exports.
In corn, one of the destinations for those exports increasingly is Mexico. It is the largest export market for U.S. corn.
It's like 6.5% of the total production goes to Mexico alone. The two countries combined, when you look at corn and corn products, it's about 1.8 billion bushels of corn, which is the entire production of the state of Minnesota. So it's a really, really big deal. It's the gold standard in my mind. It's something that we could replicate across the world.
But despite it being the gold standard for U.S. farmers, America does run a trade deficit in agriculture with both Mexico and Canada.
You probably do like I do, and most of the people we know want to have, fruits and vegetables we used to not get in the wintertime. Now we want them 365 days a year. That means we have to buy them and import them from other places. And the result of that is even though we're exporting more and more agricultural volume. We're also importing more. That has resulted in our agricultural balance of trade going negative.
So that is the state of agriculture in the United States. The other voice you heard was Stu Swanson, whom we talked to about a year and a half ago. He's a corn and soybean farmer out in Iowa. And he said, they're sort of running out of hope at this point. And it's fine. Kailey, you mentioned earlier there's a request now from President Trump for a supplemental for several $1 billion to farmers. And that's fine. They need that money desperately. But every farmer you talk to says, we don't want subsidies. We want to be able to sell our products around the world. And as you know, that got hurt the first time President Trump was president because of the cutoff of China.
David, is there any economic constituency used as a political piñata more than the farmers?
No kidding. That's totally right. I mean, it's no coincidence that Iowa is where you have the caucuses to begin with, right? I mean,
yes. E15.
But it's tragic actually to talk to these people. I mean, Stu Swanson said, people are getting out of farming. He's a third generation farmer. He has 2 daughters who have trained to go into agriculture, and he's not sure he's going to be able to stay in the business. And it brings tears to his eyes. He talks about people actually committing suicide out there in the Midwest. It is a very serious situation. And go back to the USMCA. Therefore, the farmers say, whatever you do, don't take away the export markets in Mexico and Canada that we have. Don't blow this up. That would really hurt the farmers terribly.
It's an important show tonight.
It very much is. A special Wall Street Week focus on the USMCA agreement hosted by our very own David Weston, of course. Looking forward to that at 6 p.m. this evening. You can catch it every Friday, of course, here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Just like you can so frequently catch Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino, who are joining us now. Rick, of course, Stonecourt Capital Partner and Republican strategist, and Jeanne, our Democratic analyst and Democracy Visiting Fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center. Welcome to you both. Jeanne, we were just hearing David talk about the dire economic situation that many farmers find themselves in, hence the request for some $10 billion more in funding for them in the supplemental. That is supposed to be one of the sweeteners for Democrats. That plus funding for Ebola, for example, maybe gets them on board with funding more money for the Pentagon. Is it likely to work?
I don't think so. And it's fascinating because the Ebola funding, as you mentioned, the farmers funding, all to try to attract Democrats over. But the problem is, Kailey, the war is so wildly unpopular, not just with Democrats, but the American public writ large, who I think in the last CBS poll said 69% say the war is not worth the cost. So it's going to be very difficult to do this. By trying to do it via supplemental, which means you have to go on reconciliation and you've got to get the 50 votes. And that's going to be hard because probably they can lose 3 Republicans if they have Fetterman with them. But you've got more than 3 Republicans who are skeptical about this. And let's not forget, this is to me like, paying your electricity bill, which I do, Kailey, all the time. But you're paying for something after you're told it's over. And it wasn't even popular. I like my electricity. The war people don't like, and now they're going to pay $88 billion for it. So it's really, really a hard sell, and it's a vote nobody wants to take.
I'll just be personal for a minute here. I hope they keep this Penn Station money in there. It's $1 billion, Rick. You spent enough time underground Penn Station to know what I'm talking about. I see you, Rick Davis, waiting for that Amtrak. But I thought the president said New York was being taken over by communists. Is that money going to get the support of Republicans?
Yeah, the little bit of infrastructure funds were for Washington, D.C. and New York City. I mean, you're not going to get a lot of popularity by repairing those things, but please keep the Penn Station funding in. It desperately needs a facelift. That would actually make me think about voting for Republicans in New York City if we could get that passed. So, look, at the end of the day, this can be a hard sell. Democrats have already said, regardless of any incentives in agriculture or health care like the Ebola money, we're out. We're not going to give you a win right before the midterms. They think the war overtakes all other things as being negative. Like Jeanne said, nope, this was not sold to begin with. It wasn't sold throughout, and it isn't being sold today as a win. And so you're asking Democrats to support something they know is a dog, and you're asking Republicans to start barking. I mean, like, these guys don't want to vote on this either. They've got to win re-election, and they know the public doesn't like it. So I think this is going to be a bit of a slog. And it's coming at a time when the president's relationships with the Congress are at a low ebb, even compared to his first term. And so I think that the campaign that needs to be waged to get this done is going to have to start right away.
Well, it's going to have to start in a couple weeks because Congress left town already for an extended July 4th recess, Rick. So I'm not sure how immediately this is going to get started. But we did see the Speaker of the House meeting with President Trump at the White House yesterday. President Trump posted on Truth Social after that, calling on Republicans to stop grandstanding and disrupting business on the House floor. Is the Speaker being honest with the president in your mind, Rick, about what is achievable in the way that, say, the Senate Majority Leader, John Thune, is trying to be?
Look, I think that it's pretty clear that people tend to tell the president what he wants to hear or what they think he wants to hear. So I would be surprised if there's any tough love from the speaker. He seems to have basically abdicated his role as speaker to the president of the United States. But remember, it's not so much taking votes on these supplementals, it's clearing the decks so that you can get that done. And the president has just gummed it up by saying, I'm not signing anything until the Save America Act is done. So does that mean that this is dead on arrival?
Great question. Jeannie, we've got about a minute left. We just talked to Madeleine Dean, Democrat from Pennsylvania, says no more shutdowns. Can we assume that Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries see it the same way when appropriations matter in September?
Yeah, I'm not sure we can assume anything. I mean, that's the other thing. You guys were just talking about the calendar. It is so short, and we have this government funding deadline on September 30th. Yeah. It would make no political sense for them to shut down the government. She's absolutely right about that. But can they agree? And if so, how? And that's where this supplemental or reconciliation, however they try to do it, comes down to play is, are they going to be able to get the Republicans they need on board to get the 50? And then what are they going to need? That's the Senate. What is Johnson going to need in the House? And that's where the SAVE Act that Rick was just talking about is. And so I don't know how they move forward on this. And there's very few working days left when they come back from July 4th. Then they have the August recess, and we are off to the races on the midterm.
Well, we got a lot to look forward to here, don't we? We haven't even talked about what's happening on the National Mall. Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino, thank you both. Bloomberg Politics contributors will meet you on the late edition of Balance of Power, as we do every Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. We're going to turn our attention coming up to what's happening with John Bolton. Is it possible he goes to prison? We'll talk to Robert McWhirter about it. Our favorite lawyer from Maricopa County is up next on Bloomberg TV and radio.
It's 1:40 on Wall Street. I'm Amy Morris. Wall Street traders kept driving a rotation out of high-profile chip makers and into a broader category of companies, stocks halting a 4-day slide. And we check those markets for you all day long here at Bloomberg. The S&P 500 is up 0.1%. NASDAQ little changed on the upside, and the Dow little changed on the upside. The 10-year Treasury yield at 4.37%, the 2-year yield at 4.09%. And even with new tensions in the Strait of Hormuz, oil seems to be headed for the biggest weekly drop in a month. WTI crude oil is down about 3.5%, now around $69 a barrel. Brent crude near $72 a barrel. That is a drop of 4.2%. Consumer sentiment in the U.S. rose in June as lower gas prices provided some relief for Americans grappling with high inflation. Consumers expect prices to rise at an annual rate of 4.6% over the next year. That's down from 4.8% in May. They also saw costs rising at an annual rate of 3.3% over the next 5 to 10 years. Now, the cost of living remains at the forefront of consumers' minds. More than half of consumers mentioned in that survey that high prices are weighing down their personal finances. Minneapolis Fed President Neil Kashkari says signs of widespread inflation led him to pencil in one interest rate increase for the year. Kashkari believes inflation will remain elevated through the end of this year. He says he's concerned about how officials get inflation back down to the Fed's 2% target in a reasonable period of time without doing any damage to the economy. Kashkari spoke to Bloomberg on the sidelines of the Aspen Ideas Festival in Colorado. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Back to Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu and Kailey Leinz.
All right, Amy Morris watching the markets for us. Thank you so much. Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I am Kailey Leinz alongside Joe Mathieu, where if you watch or listen to us frequently, you've probably heard us have a few conversations with the former national security advisor in the first Trump administration, John Bolton. In fact, we spoke with him last week, and Joe actually asked him about what he had planned for today, which was a guilty plea that he has entered to unlawfully retaining national defense information. So pleading guilty to a single charge of illegally keeping classified material today. And it now raises the question that Joe posed to John Bolton last week, which is he going to serve time in prison? Of course, he didn't answer that question for you, Joe. He wasn't able to comment on this case, but that is a very real possibility of up to 5 years.
When you read this, prosecutors agreed to ask for a sentence that includes a fine and a prison term of not more than 5. Bolton could argue for little or no time behind bars, but we wonder if that's possible, and we thought we would talk to an expert. This has been a very busy and important week for legal news here in the Capitol as well, with the Supreme Court busy yesterday. There was a lot of news that didn't allow us to get to some of this, so we want to do it all right now with our friend Robert McWhirter, the constitutional lawyer, practicing criminal defense, civil rights lawyer in Maricopa County, Arizona, joins us from the law office of Robert McWhirter, although it looks like you're on the road, Robert. Are you coming to town for the big state fair on the Mall? We've got a Ferris wheel here, you know. We thought maybe this might bring you to Washington finally.
Sorry, I don't think I'm going to make that particular event, although I would like to see the condition of the reflecting pool.
Yeah, well, we have an update on the reflecting pool. We'll get to that before the end of the hour. Robert, is John Bolton going to prison?
He very possibly could. This is going to be purely up to the judge, and it will depend on his calculation of the federal sentencing guidelines. I would guess that calculation will show that he possibly will get 18 to 24 months. He has no prior criminal history, so that's relevant. The statute, in case your viewers want to look it up, is 18 U.S.C. 3553, which is what a federal judge uses, the factors to determine a sentence. And Bolton can point to a long career of public service as mitigation against time in prison, and the fact that possibly nobody was really hurt by this document leak. But that being said, the judge certainly has the discretion to give him anything from 5 years or less, and perhaps more if he calculates more. I doubt it would be anything more than 5 years, but it could. He could be doing some months in prison.
So he's ultimately likely to serve some kind of punishment for illegally handling classified material. What's different then between John Bolton and President Trump, who kept documents at Mar-a-Lago, or even former President Biden, who had documents in his garage?
Yeah, that therein lies the key question. What is different is the incredible volume of difference. John Bolton took some things and emailed some family members and a few things like that. Now, he shouldn't have done it. It violated the statute, and he recognizes that if he goes to trial, he was going to lose on several counts. So you're talking a relatively few files here, right? What you're dealing with Mar-a-Lago and what was then former President Trump are boxes and boxes of classified materials, which could be really calculate up to a huge sentence. And frankly, if you look at the complication of prosecuting John Bolton, they had to go through his emails, do some discovery. What they would do with Donald Trump, in this case was all queued up, is basically say, look, here's the documents, here's one in his stage, here's one in his bathroom, here's another one in his bathroom. Really, the evidence against who was then Donald Trump, former president, number 45, as opposed to current Donald Trump, 47, was pretty damning and pretty compelling. You also mentioned the question about the Biden situation. The Biden documents were, again, very narrow, and it was pretty clear it was a mistake. And so they did a thorough investigation and realized, well, there really wasn't a basis to charge him with a crime because it was unintentional. And he just took it over as former vice president. So all those cases are very distinguishable from the much, well, based on the evidence, the much higher culpability of Donald Trump.
Oh, really something. Imagine sharing a cell with John Bolton, the stories at night. Robert, where would he go? What kind of prison are we talking about here? He's not wearing black and white stripes and busting rocks, I'm guessing.
There are various security levels. Generally, there's 5 different security levels, and the Bureau of Prisons has changed that from time to time. He would generally go to what would be called a federal camp. And often in those federal camps, the actual wall is like a fence that's about 4 feet high. So it's fairly good. But I will remind you one thing. Todd Blanche has just rewritten the Bureau of Prison Designation policies and has taken unto himself the power to designate any inmate to go to any place that he chooses to send them. And this is frightening because this has never happened before. So he could actually, in his own discretion, according to the rules he just wrote for the Department of Justice, send John Bolton to someplace like Leavenworth or Marion, which are the highest security classifications, versus a relatively low security or low security in the camp, just as he did with Ms. Maxwell, giving her a less serious classification and a lower incarceration. So really, this is a level of discretion. And given Blanche's boss, who's blindly loyal to, which is Donald Trump, desire to go after enemies, John Bolton could be looking at a classification far in excess of what he could expect, and a life in prison that would be very bad. In fact, if I was his defense lawyer, I would argue that to the judge, at the whim of the Attorney General, or in this case, Acting Attorney General, John Bolton could be unduly punished far in excess of what he would deserve given his history in the service.
Wow, it's incredible to consider, and we will ultimately look toward the sentencing there to get some clarity on this. While we have you, Robert, I'd also like to ask you about the decisions we've gotten from the Supreme Court this week, and frankly would love to hear from you on the decisions we have yet to get, like birthright citizenship in the Lisa Cook case. But on the decisions we got yesterday, most of them split exactly on ideological lines, including the two cases that ruled essentially in favor of the administration's immigration policies, allowing the ending of or the potential deportations of hundreds of thousands of individuals coming from crisis countries, stopping asylum seekers at the border as well. What do you make of the rulings? Are you surprised by them, or does, as the justices in the majority ruled, the president does have leeway here?
Well, I'm not surprised by them, and I will say I'm sadly not surprised by these because the justices have been very pro-Trump on this. And frankly, if you look at these same justices who did things to hem in presidential power when Joe Biden was president, they're taking a very different tune now. What literally this means is that we are sending people back to their deaths. The State Department has an advisal that, American citizens should not travel to Haiti, and yet we're going to send these people back to Haiti where they will be killed. And they've done a little sleight of hand as well. In another case, they said that, well, when a person seeks asylum, they come to a border official, and we can block them from stepping into the United States, which means the United States law does not apply, international law does not apply, the Refugee Act of 1980 doesn't apply, and we can just go ahead as a matter of discretion, not even bother to hear an asylum case with just total discretion because U.S. law doesn't apply to them until their foot hits U.S. soil, and we're going to prevent that from happening. Well, all the Jewish persons in World War II who sought to come to the United States would never have been allowed in under that. And what we've done here is just appalling. And frankly, the people seeking political asylum have a very, very low criminality rate. They come here, they're following the rules, and this is a way to just shut it down in order to try to, I'm not sure what, jack up deportation numbers, look like you're tough on crime in the border, and it does none of that. But that's what the justices have said the president has the power to do.
It's something, too, that the economic impact of this could be very real, knowing how many Haitians work in our hospitals and nursing homes, which is interesting to hear politicians tell them to get the hell out of our country. Robert, how do you get 350,000 Haitians and 7,000 Syrians out of the country? Are these going to be on government airplanes, or do they have to see themselves out?
Well, they're presumably going to go chase them down, but now you're going to spend all your time chasing after persons who have a legal status, which you're now revoking. So it's not like they are undocumented. They actually have a status. And you're going to waste all your time chasing after the most law-abiding persons within our midst who want to work in our hospitals and nursing homes. And the economic impact, as you just showed, is going to be huge. And these are the people that you want in America, not the people you want to get rid of.
Well, as we consider the people in America, there's also a looming question about the status of people who are born in this country and birthright citizenship, which of course the president would like to revoke for people who are born to people who are not here legally. The court is clearly saving this one till the very end, as they often do in their summer term with some of these higher profile cases, this and the Lisa Cook case. Should this, in your mind, have been one that requires so much deliberation? It seemed like when the president pursued this initially, it was pretty cut and dry. Almost every law expert we spoke to said, no, that's in the Constitution.
Absolutely. This is one of these things where we're going to drop the opinion and get out of Dodge fast. I mean, look, the precedent is a case called Wong Kim Ark from 1898, which said that, no, if you're born in this country, you are a citizen. The 14th Amendment says it. And in fact, the common law of the United States before the 14th Amendment said that as well. It was called jus soli. You're born on the soil. And also jus sanguinis, born of the blood of an American citizen. So this has always been established law. My prediction for this is that the court is going to uphold the law and the 14th Amendment. You may get what I would call an embarrassing dissent from Justices Alito and Thomas. And if they do so, I think they will embarrass themselves, because the law is very clear. The history is very clear on this. And, so that's and then the administration is going to, talk about all kinds of how terrible these justices are, how they don't love America, and all that kind of thing. So that would be my prediction. I predict that the Chief Justice will write this opinion. Perhaps Justice Gorsuch will. And that's the way that it's going to come out. And Donald Trump will now run against the Supreme Court, like he likes to try to do, and somehow say this is destroying America. They made arguments that are really kind of spurious in front of the Supreme Court, that somehow it doesn't apply to everybody, just applied to black people after the Civil War. I got to tell you, all the guys who fought in the Irish Brigade at the Battle of Gettysburg, they knew their children were going to be citizens of the United States. And those people were the ones who wrote the 14th Amendment in Congress. And I think the historical record is clear. I think it was embarrassing for the court to even accept the case. The law was so clear on that. But, I've been wrong before.
All right. Well, we appreciate you joining us, and I guess we'll find out next week whether Robert McWhirter is wrong or right on this one. Monday is the next opinion day. Robert, thank you for joining us. He's a constitutional lawyer and practicing criminal defense and civil rights lawyer in Maricopa County, Arizona. So Monday's the next opinion day. We know it for sure. We don't know guaranteed that we will get the two opinions we're waiting on, the birthright citizenship case or the Lisa Cook case on Monday, as we have seen this court in recent years bleed into July.
That's correct.
On high profile
We'll see
cases.
if they add some more days here. We should note that President Trump has gotten on the stage here. He's at the Faith and Freedom Coalition's Road to Majority Conference. And Kailey, interesting, he's at the Hilton.
Yeah.
This is the old Hinckley Hilton, as it has become known here in Washington, D.C. Last time he was there was the Correspondents' dinner, which, of course, was attacked and brought to an early end. We're supposed to replay that dinner at the end of next month. We'll meet you on the late edition of Balance of Power right here on Bloomberg.